Hi, my name is Jacob McGregor. As always, I'm here with my co-host, Jason Diodati, and welcome to another episode of Your Neck of the Woods. I promised you guys more guests from the upcoming election, and boy, do we have guests. So, starting with today, we have Ward 12 candidate Mike Lavalley here with us. Mike, do you want to introduce yourself?
Sure. Good morning. Thank you very much, Jacob, and Jason for having me on your podcast. I really appreciate the opportunity. Pleasure to be speaking with you today. My name is Mike Lavalley, running in Ward 12. For those that aren't aware, Ward 12 is in the deep southeast part of the city. We border on the eastern edge of the city and the most southern edge. So that's where you find us, and that's our ward.
All right. So I looked into you a little bit before we booked this podcast and found out you grew up in Saskatchewan. I'm curious, growing up in Saskatchewan, what attracted you to move to Calgary?
Yes, it was a long and winding road. Actually, I was born and raised in a very northern part of Saskatchewan, the community of Creighton, which is right next to Flin Flon, Manitoba. It's a border city, not unlike Lloydminster, that more people might be more familiar with, but on the Saskatchewan-Manitoba border. And growing up in the north, and then moved to Saskatoon and attended university there. Started working with Royal Bank and worked in a few places in Saskatchewan, and ended up moving here from Regina, where I was stationed with the Royal Bank. At the time, I was working with the provincial headquarters of Royal Bank in Regina, and an opportunity arose as they were restructuring to join a Western Canadian team of operations for the bank in Calgary, and I was fortunate enough to be chosen for that team, and that's what brought me here.
Awesome. You're not a Rider fan, are you?
I get asked that all the time. I believe in complete honesty, and I grew up in Saskatchewan. I lived in Regina. I was a season ticket holder when I lived in Regina. Game day downtown, we all wore the jerseys. So, yep, I would be lying if that was not in my background.
I feel that. Born and raised here, I have trouble not bleeding red in a lot of sports, but I won't hold your Rider fandom against you too much. So,
it's a long time ago. I've lived in Calgary for about 25 years now. So yeah, so don't prosecute me too much on it.
so yeah, we've heard a lot of, we're starting to hear as I go canvass and hear from more potential constituents about the issues people see as most important up here in Ward 1. What are you hearing about as some of the more important issues down in Ward 12?
Yeah, I think a lot of them are probably similar to what you're hearing when you speak with the constituents. Um, I get it all the time with regards to fiscal responsibility and taxation. And the if you look at the pattern over the last 10 years, a lot of people in the ward have seen their taxes rise, in the neighborhood of 80, 100% or more. And there's concern that if it keeps going in that direction, it's going to really impact on affordability. So I'm hearing that in that we, maybe need to be a little bit more careful with our fiscal house.
You and I are gonna get along quite well here, I think, because yes, I am hearing that as a major concern. One of my major platform plank, so to speak, is to keep our taxes low while not impacting community services and keeping Calgary an affordable place to live, because it's becoming a lot more like Vancouver, where you have to scrape and fight just to afford a little one-bedroom apartment that can't support a family.
Yeah, that's an excellent point, and that certainly is my concern about it moving forward, is the impact on affordability and younger generations. I've lived in Calgary for a long time now. The people would be shocked, new people moving to Calgary, if they heard what I paid for my first home when I moved to Calgary. But it was less than $80,000. I'm not sure you can build a garage for that now.
Exactly.
But it was a great opportunity, and I want to see those types of opportunities, and probably not at that level. We're never going to get there, but we need to keep affordability going. If we're going to grow and attract people to our city, that movement or that desire is going to be impeded if affordability becomes a problem.
So on another topic I think we'll agree on, and that's closed sessions of council and transparency. Boy, do I think there's an old saying that democracy dies in the dark, and I understand that you can't necessarily negotiate in public and be successful, but I believe that there's a lot of these closed sessions that perhaps don't need to be taking place. What's your stance on that?
I agree with you completely in what you just said. I would not contradict anything from those last few sentences. If you look at the City of Calgary survey and the citizen satisfaction survey, the last one that came out in the fall, its trust in the City of Calgary is the lowest it's been since they started the survey. And I firmly believe that that is a part of it. We live in a world of transparency now. People have access to vast amounts of information, and they want to know why things are the way they are. And by having the large number of in-camera private sessions at council, that's really contradictory to transparency and keeping people informed as to what's happening.
Well, and it makes it more, and one of the things I've heard up here as well is we're not getting a good level of communication from council on the information that we do have, and it's a lot easier to communicate when everybody has a better understanding of what's going on.
Absolutely. I think probably some councillors do a better job of communicating information to their constituents than others. But if you look at and if you sign up for the communication notes that come out from the different council offices, some of them are virtually non-existent. Some, they'll talk about changes to your garbage pickup schedule. But I think Calgarians would like to see more information on, strategies and plans that are being worked on with regards to the city, so that you don't have this large amount of information get dropped all of a sudden saying, hey, we've worked on this plan for 5 years. It's a 50-page document. What do you think of it now?
I'm getting the sense you may be referring to the guidebook for great communities, or what is now the guide for local area planning, and I completely agree that the whole idea that we just heard about this this year, despite the amount of hours that were apparently put into it, is a great example of where we can definitely improve.
Yes, if you look at it, I believe the comment that was made at the end of the public engagement sessions with council at City Hall, it went on for 3 long days. I believe I heard that it was the longest public engagement session in a generation for sure, maybe recorded memory at City Hall. And regardless of whether you support or oppose the guidebook, the fact that there was that much engagement and a lot of it was in not all positive for the guidebook, I think that speaks a little bit to the process, and it's something we can learn from.
Couldn't agree more, my friend. Jason, haven't heard from you yet today. Do you want to add anything?
Absolutely. And yeah, great points, gentlemen. And Mike, thank you so much for talking about you and your platform and where you stand. And I kind of want to start, if it's okay, Jake, I'd like to go back and just talk about the fiscal responsibility and looking at the residential tax increases. And I think, and the reason why I want to go back is because I think it touches on the second key point that I think both of you are very aligned on, which is those in-camera sessions. So as you said, right, when you look at 2011 to 2020, it's quite a jump from what you were paying in 2010, which I think, as mentioned on your site, Mike, is it was $2,500 versus now being $4,500 in 2020. And then in 2021, the effective tax increase has been targeted to 0. And so, Mike, would you agree? And Jacob, I'd love your opinion as well. Do you both agree that this is part of the problem with municipal politics in Calgary, where politicking seems to be not only part of the agenda, but almost ingrained in the playbook?
Oh, the zero tax is clearly electioneering to me. What do you think, Mike?
Absolutely. I've made that comment publicly and in writing before, that it's no great surprise that we now magically have 0 residential tax increase leading up to an election. All sorts of things tend to happen in election years and leading up to elections. And this particular aspect was pretty predictable.
Well, and it's, it's frustrating, I think, because it now doesn't really give a lay of the land for the next council and, of course, the next, mayor to really bounce back positively in 2022. So it, in my opinion, it creates an opening of dissidence next year when the effective tax rate, hopefully with you gentlemen in, goes to maybe at most, 3 or 4%, but nonetheless, it creates that kind of, it's not setting up the next party or the next grouping for success, the next, board or council. So on top of that, and going back to what we said as well, in the in-camera sessions, would you both agree? And I'd love to hear your thoughts as well as, what potential solutions are. But would you agree these in-camera sessions create gaps? And as you said, Mike, very aptly, in this, epic age of information, I believe that it creates these gaps where it now lets the media, not to vilify them, because especially during a pandemic, they're doing their best, and it's a hard time right now to be constantly reporting on the doom and gloom. But I think it opens up the door for media to become the quote unquote scapegoat when they're also trying to do a job, sell newspapers, get people to read their articles, and they're filling in the blanks of these in-camera sessions, which spreads to more, again, dissidence and frustration amongst, people in constituents. And so you know, what's the solution here? Again, Mike, I think on your website, you kind of mentioned that, you know, okay, so I think there was a number back, you know, in the old council group where, you know, it looked like it was about 14% of those meetings were in camera versus now that's gone up dramatically. I can't remember the number. It looks like 23% between 2013 and 2017. You know, what is the solution? Because like you said as well, Jacob, to your point, public negotiation isn't always the best form of negotiation for all parties or for at least the city as a party in those negotiations.
Yeah, that's a question, an excellent question, Jason, is in terms of what's the solution to that. And I've been asked that before, and sometimes it's not that complicated. There are things that definitely would need to still be discussed in private because of maybe the sensitivity of their nature. But if I'm going to refer back to one particular example as an example that I witnessed in council, and it was not too long ago. I was attending, sitting in on a council meeting virtually, and the council was to receive an update on the city's position and COVID. Seeing as how we're talking about COVID, you know, they were to get a briefing from one of the city's medical officers on COVID, but they held that session in private, and so as a result of that, none of the councillors, because anything that's discussed in private is not allowed to be discussed outside afterwards. So it really handcuffed the councillor's ability to communicate an update, whether it be good, bad, or indifferent with regards to the COVID situation. Now, the reason given for that particular meeting was that the particular officer that was going to give council the update was not authorized to speak publicly on it, so that they had to move it in private. But my answer to that would be, well, then have a separate meeting where
exactly
could be briefed that's not in private, that would then allow those councillors to relay that information at their discretion out to their constituents. And that way it would just be one less in private meeting that leads to, you know, suspicion.
And just to jump off of that, and that's a great example of what you were talking about, Jason, where this muddies the waters and it creates confusion. And with regards to COVID especially, we've seen the effects of this confusion and sort of the fog of the issue in turning a pandemic political. And not that it wouldn't have to some degree anyways, but the more gaps in information there are, the more you open yourself up to that.
Absolutely. And that really, you know, I think is where the changes are necessary. Jacob, we've talked, you know, both of us many times about how this current council is, yes, also undergoing a pandemic, and yes, you know, is doing their best. We all have the same idea in mind, which is to make Calgary the best Calgary it can be. But I think it just illuminates a little bit of the why behind why we should make some changes here. Because I think, unfortunately, there's that sense of communication has been lost because, like we both have mentioned, these in-camera sessions are a really good or easy way to not face the public or to not face potential scrutiny by having it behind closed doors versus having a separate meeting where those councillors can get briefed and all those good, you know, great things.
And Jay, let's talk about that communication issue, because a big part of what, again, both me and Mike seem to want to do is rebuild that trust and rebuild that level of respect and decorum that politics and public service is supposed to have. And right now, council is so polarized and fractured that we're losing some of that. Mike, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that.
Yes, absolutely. That comes under that whole kind of an umbrella of respect in communication, and that it goes a lot of ways. Sometimes, you know, we've seen it all happen. It's been reported in the media. If you attend council meetings, you'll see, you know, name calling. Wow. I think sometimes those slinging the lack of respect forget that the person they're addressing represents tens of thousands of Calgarians. That's the representative. If you are showing a complete lack of respect for that representative, in effect, you are showing a complete lack of respect for the opinions of tens of thousands of Calgarians. It's part of, unfortunately, it's part of what's evolved with this very divisive nature that we see in politics, increasingly as of late, and it doesn't look well. It's not a good look for politicians at any level. I don't want to date myself or make myself look too old here, but do you ever notice how they're not referred to as dignitaries anymore when you refer to politicians?
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And sorry, Jake, not to cut you off, but that's exactly it. I mean, the one thing that I think all three of us want to be clear here is that this isn't a softening or a, you know, I know that right now in society we have this pendulum shifting where, you know, we have what is referred to by some people as the woke, very sensitive, you know, groups of individuals and communities and people, and then the older school, you know, rough and tough, you know, words, sticks and stones, you know, hurt my bones, but brain, you know, but words never hurt me, you know, kind of pendulum shift. And I don't think what we're saying here is that, and I'm sure you both agree, is that we need to water down and, you know, be fluffy and rainbows and butterflies all day. But as you said, Mike, I mean, there is something to be said about when you're addressing an idea or a belief or what have you that is represented by tens of thousands of Calgarians, to stoop as low as you quote unquote either legally or legislatively can to call, you know, your opponent or the person whose idea you're opposing to be silly, or to use those you know, pseudo decorum words that are clearly meant to be much more vicious but are not allowed to be. You are 100% disrespecting a large group of the population. And I think there's something to be said about going after and being contrarian or having a different idea specifically about someone's idea and not going after the person's integrity or their character themselves. Again, unless their integrity, of course, needs to be called into question. But I think that can even be done without using, you know, these pseudo decorum words. I think it can be done in a much more respectful manner.
Yeah, it comes back to professionalism and treating people with respect. And to touch on a comment that you made about treating people with respect, yeah, that shouldn't be confused or mixed up with a sign of weakness and conviction, or that somebody has gone soft. You mentioned sort of a wokeness type of thing. They would be, for those that know me the best, if they thought my name was thrown in a same sentence like that, there would be quite a bit of laughing going on. So
mine as well, if we're being honest, there would be some loud guffaws at that statement. But it goes back to something we've talked about before, Jason. That's also about how when somebody has different approach to an issue right now, there's a tendency to block that out as being some affront to the democratic process, as opposed to actually working to find common ground so that things can actually get done. What I'm not seeing right now.
Absolutely. I mean, you know, respect should not be politicized, right? And I think we all know what I mean by that. There should not be a leaning side where respect is on one and not on the other. Respect is all of politics. I mean, respect should be ingrained in everything we do, of course, but specific to politics, no matter what side of the pendulum or what side of this of the spectrum or what have you you're on, respect should not fall on either side or center. It should be across the board. And I think that's really what you both represent. Hopefully coming into council, you know, in this next round of elections is respect across the board, decorum, and professionalism, which are not politicized. They see no colors, for lack of a better term, you know?
Yeah, you know, you're bang on there, Jason. And the part of that respect and showing respect for people is willing to listen to opinions. I think if you're coming to council and you're looking to represent people, yes, you have to have ideas. Yes, you have to have opinions. And yes, you have to have things that you think need to be accomplished. But you are representing in my ward, it's going to be around 90,000 people. And not everybody is going to have the exact same opinions and thoughts and ideas. And you have to be open to listening to them, to understanding them. I think too often in our political spheres today, people take sides and you agree with me or you're wrong, is the attitude. And that lends to some of the fighting and the divisiveness that we see. Now, we're not always going to agree on everything. And sometimes we agree to disagree, but we don't learn anything and we don't advance by sealing ourselves in an echo chamber and only listening to those that agree 100% with our own opinions.
So
100%.
So getting on to a slightly different topic again, we touched on the guidebook kind of briefly, but I would like your thoughts on this whole idea of densification and urban sprawl that have become such a huge part of the discourse lately.
Yeah, for sure. Now, one who lives in a glass house has to be careful not to throw stones. If I live in Ward 12. It's not that long ago that none of these neighborhoods existed in Calgary. So it would be almost hypocritical to come out and talk about urban sprawl from somebody who is part of it and is living here. So I recognize that. That being said, I think we can control our growth in a better way, in a more thoughtful way, and in a respectful way. To tie back into our last topic on respect, there's a great opportunity when new neighborhoods are created to do them in a fashion that is responsible and supports the city's goals. So if you're creating a new neighborhood, we can use some of the ideas that were presented in the guidebook in terms of densification. Now, and I'm going to go on a bit of an aside here, but crowding is not densification. There are some communities in my neighborhood that were, in theory, engineered to the 50-kilometer-an-hour standard at the time, but you literally cannot have two cars pass on the street each other as they approach because the street is too narrow. And this is in the summertime on dry roads. As we are designing neighborhoods, that doesn't lead to safety, certainly during times of snowfall and emergency vehicles reaching homes if there's a fire in the neighborhood. It doesn't improve walkability in any meaningful form because a lot of these places don't have sidewalks on them as well. They are a little bit too crowded together. That being said, we can do a way better job when we create some new neighborhoods. And I'm going to point to some really great examples that were brought up. And if you listen to the multi-day session regarding the guidebook, one of the neighborhoods in our ward here in Ward 12 Seton was brought up as a shining example
Yes.
of best practices with regards to neighborhoods in terms of, yes, there's density, but it's not done with crowding. It's done with multi-level homes design and streets and transit and traffic design around that. And you know this is going to lead into a green line conversation. I can't help but bring it up. But but it was designed with all of the best practices. If you look at Mahogany as an example, and some of the developments there with Westman Village, and the density is designed around there, the walkability, the shopping that's available. In those areas, there are two really shining examples in Calgary of expansion that was done right, that didn't, that it's helping, it's new development, but that it helps cut back on the level of urban sprawl, because, taking 5 feet out of the width of a road does nothing meaningful to eliminate urban sprawl. It gets you an extra 1 row of houses in a neighborhood, maybe, which doesn't meet our goals or our targets in terms of limiting that sprawl. But the very well designed neighborhoods where it's taken in right from the start, to have that properly executed density, with the planning and the infrastructure that goes with it. We just have some great examples here that I think we could follow going forward. And then there wouldn't, if we did more of that, there wouldn't be the pressure, and we could show more respect for the existing neighborhoods, so that if somebody has invested and made that decision to invest in that single family home on a large format lot, that they're not going to have a towering 4-story building blocking out the sun and looking into their backyard, because we have more pressure to densify those existing neighborhoods.
See, it's very interesting you mentioned crowding, because that's not a factor a lot of people are talking about with this whole issue right now. And my dad, as Jason and you viewers will know, grew up in Montreal, and being an older city, there's parts of Montreal that look like one of, and it's part of the character of the city, of course, but there's parts of the city that are like an old European capital, which is great in some ways, but it's also terrible neighborhood modern design in other ways, because it just doesn't fit how society and travel and things like that work now with cars and everything else. So that is definitely something we need to look at, because like you said, if 2 cars can't really pass at the speed limit, that's just not good design.
And that's exactly it, Jacob. And it's great points, Mike. I mean, that's exactly it. For what? To build an extra row of houses, right? Like the quality of life that and the ingenuity, or the intelligence that goes into these designs needs to be looked at. Not the density and the crowding, like you both have said. And on that point, and I'd love to ask you, Mike, it was the same question I asked for Ward 11 candidate Courtney Brannigan, and it's something that I think we will be seeing and facing in the next 2 to 4 years. But with the current climate as it is with COVID, and we're now seeing this, booming, demand for single detached homes, where in that mindset, sprawling is hard not to do. What do you see to come in the next 2 to 4 years? Do you see a desire for tower building and more dense living? Do you see that this trend of single detached home will grow? And whichever way you answer, and again, I joked with Courtney, I said, welcome to Hardball with Jason. But, it's, is there something to be said about planning with both styles in mind? And do you see, again, a favoritism with the current climate that we live in?
Yeah, there's no denying that in recent times there has been an uptick in demand for single family for a variety of reasons. But I'm going to come back again to a great example in our ward is Seaton. It's been highlighted by many people as a shining example of done correctly. And it is not all multifamily residential, and it's not all high rises. What you have is, in order to try and make the walkability of the neighborhoods the best it can be, where you have a proximity to shopping facilities, infrastructure, then you have higher density there and you have multifamily residential. But as you move away from that and it gets out of the range of how far you can walk and carry your groceries home from the store, then you start to see different levels of single family residential. And I think that strikes a good balance because moving forward, as much as there are some trends right now, I don't think long term you're going to see massive shifts, either towards or away from single family dwellings. So we're going to need that balance going forward. And we, just to circle back to another topic, we discussed affordability, and single family homes are more expensive on average than multi-unit residential in terms of purchasing. And in terms of keeping, affordability in some of these most desirable neighborhoods, we are going to need that balance of multifamily and single family homes.
And I'll jump off on a lot of this again as well. And I will mention that I, as again, a lot of you know, am from Tuscany. So I'm the guy talking about urban sprawl sprawling in the other direction from you, Mike. Way at the other end of the city.
Yeah, we're almost exact opposite corners. It'd be tougher to find a longer commute between our two than there is to bring.
Exactly. But as far as that goes, it's funny you mentioned like walkability, because when I was younger, and again, I don't want to date you or myself too much, but when I was a kid in the 90s, we lived in a neighborhood called Motherwell Road in the north, we lived on Motherwell Road. It was in the northeast, and you could walk to the store, you could walk to the park, you could walk to the train. It was very walkable, and that was now actually quite surprising to me, being an older neighborhood. But we need to get back to that more complete style of neighborhood building to accomplish the city's goals, I think.
Yes, but I also think it needs, I agree with you, but I also think it needs balance. You can't promote walkability at the complete expense of access by personal vehicle transportation. And
oh, absolutely.
And let me just expand on that for a second. There's, we're seeing, Jason, you mentioned the trends and the recent trend toward single family homes. We're also seeing a lot more awareness now with the importance of supporting small local business. And small local business, a lot of those businesses, they need a volume. They need a certain volume of business and transactions in order to stay viable. And for most of those business models, if they had to depend just on how many people are within a walking distance of their business. Now, if they're selling goods, it has to be, also a carrying walking distance. And if it's not just a service business. If they had to depend strictly on the walkability, they would be in trouble because there wouldn't be enough close population walkable to them. So, the allowance for personal transportation, cars, so that people can, from a slightly farther away, can still patronize these smaller local businesses, I think is key in supporting them going forward.
I couldn't agree more. And this whole idea that cars are suddenly out of favor with a portion of the population, that doesn't make them a unimportant mode of transportation. A big majority of people still have a personal vehicle and still need to use it. So we still need neighborhoods designed to be able to use a vehicle.
Absolutely. That ties into the downtown plan as well. I know if you look at the plan for downtown, it is very anti-personal vehicle. There's an inverted triangle of how they see people traveling to downtown, and at the bottom of that triangle, the least desirable is a personal vehicle. That being said, when I ask people in my ward, why don't you patronize business downtown or attend events downtown or go to a show, take in a nice restaurant? There's lots of them down there. What keeps you from doing that? The number one reason I hear, inevitably, parking.
Parking. Yeah, I was just gonna say.
There's no parking downtown. And there's an infographic in the presentation on the downtown revitalization plan. And it talks about, getting away from personal transportation, personal vehicles, because they have seen, a lot of increase in foot traffic and a lot of increase in rail transit and a lot of increase in bicycle traffic. Well, since 1996 is the cutoff year they're using. Well, guess what? There's going to be increases in bike traffic. We built a bunch of bike lanes. If there wasn't an increase,
imagine that.
If there wasn't an increase in bike traffic, then the bike lanes would be an even more huge, massive failure. We expanded transit on the lines, northwest, northeast, and the west, the west line. Yeah, I would certainly hope we've seen more people commuting downtown on transit, because we have a lot more of rail transit now. That being said, if you look at the numbers, and I'm looking at the infographic right now as we're speaking, but overwhelmingly, the favorite mode of transportation, and I say favorite because it transports the highest number of occupants to downtown. Second is LRT and rail at 232,000 to round it off in their measurements. Number one was personal vehicles, 378,000, compared to the mass of people that are using transit, and bicycles 14,000, pedestrians 67,000. Yes, I understand that there is a desire for those types of transit, but overwhelmingly the most popular way that people still connect with downtown is through personal vehicles.
100% agree. Downtown does seem like a good segue into talking must-haves and nice-to-haves. That is your term you use on your website for some choices we're gonna have to make. And I imagine a couple of these that you're gonna categorize might be downtown. So let's talk about what you might consider a must-have and a nice-to-have.
Well, it goes along to, talking about, I use the term fiscal responsibility. I think it's responsible spending. We tend to hear from, once again, divisive politics, two extreme sides. We should approve everything, and build and develop versus over here, cut everything, slash it. We don't have the money, don't spend anything. I don't think either one of them are an incredibly responsible way to approach budget management and responsibility. And that's why I don't use the term cuts. I use the term fiscal responsibility and making sensible decisions with what we're doing. There's certainly some low-hanging fruit with regards to fiscal responsibility that many people talk about. And I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time on it because it is so obvious, has been discussed by so many people. But the public art program, as it relates to the percentage of infrastructure that is spent on public art, has been a massive failure. We've gotten some things out of it, but some of our most criticized items in the city came out of that program.
Oh, you mean rocks on sticks and the blue ring and things like that?
Yeah, and the silver people
the artist
globe, people burning globe. Yeah, those are some good examples. I think that in our current environment, we could take and use that money in a much more effective way to support our goals and people of Calgary. I'll get away from that one because it's almost been beat to death. The downtown revitalization plan, they recently, as a lot of people know, allocated in a neighborhood of $200 million towards that. I'm not against that idea. I think there's certainly some things that we could do and facilitate as a city to encourage more people downtown. And that's what's going to make a thriving downtown is having people there, whether it's businesses and corporations or people live there, whether more importantly, it's having people there after hours to make it a thriving community and living downtown. But of the $200 million, there's a big chunk of it that was allocated towards the Arts Commons project. It's $80 million. When you look at the benefits of some of the things proposed under the downtown revitalization plan in terms of encouraging use of the buildings that are down there, reallocating some use, cleaning up some areas, making it more attractive that people want to be there. Those are high value items. I believe that will make a difference in terms of the attractiveness level of our downtown. The $80 million, approaching half of that initial budget for the Arts Commons project, I'm not convinced that we will see a short-term payback on that in terms of helping.
Yeah, and it's funny you mentioned attracting more people downtown, especially after hours, because we'll say outside of going to some Flames games, as I'm a season ticket holder for the Flames, if there's not a Flames game happening, I'm not downtown very much. And I know because I have spent some time downtown that I may be missing out on some other things, but there's just not that pull to get people there. So.
And especially when, like you said, Jake, both of you, Mike and Jacob, you agreed, is when you're missing key infrastructure like affordable and ample parking. I'm in that same boat. I mean, Jacob, I until recently, when I kind of am now habitating downtown, the only time I was there was if I had a meeting, and I made sure that the meeting that I had was close to 9th Avenue because I really love those 9th Avenue big parking lots. But beyond that, I was never downtown. Now that I'm here, now that I'm living in a place that is located downtown, I love it. The services that I have around me and the accessibility once you're there are pretty good, but it's getting there. And if we don't have that infrastructure set up, pairing with all this funding for downtown revitalization, what are we doing here, right? Like that begs the question. if you're spending a bunch of money in one place but not opening up the avenues for access, why are we doing this, right?
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. And in terms of access of downtown, and to tie into Jacob's question on needs to haves or versus nice to haves, we can also, you can characterize that another way in terms of high value, high return versus low value, low return in terms of our expenditures. And I warned you about it earlier. I'm in Ward 12. I have to talk about the Green Line. I'm sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, please
For
do.
sure.
Absolutely.
Go ahead.
But very controversial. A lot of people on each side of the Green Line. Either for or against the Green Line. That's a very divisive, kind of black and white type of position. Mine is more of, let's do the Green Line in a way that makes sense. If you look at the Green Line page on the City of Calgary website, the very first paragraph, it's in big bold text, outlines kind of some of the things that are the goals of the Green Line. The first thing it mentions is that it'll help kickstart things by creating 20,000 jobs. Some of those in construction, some of those would argue that our city certainly can use 20,000 new jobs right now. Absolutely.
Yes.
I've heard extremely little opposition to that. The other point they mention is it connects people and places. And the third point they mention is that it improves travel and improves some of our climate goals by taking vehicles off the road. I want to talk about, and the reason why my position is a little bit different, I don't want to scrap the Green Line unless, of course, it's done very irresponsibly. And I'm not absolutely for the Green Line at all costs. What I am is for doing it sensibly. Right now, the current construction plan goes from 16th Avenue, approximately 9 or 10 blocks south, crosses the river to downtown, and then to just north of the vast majority of the population in my ward, ending at Shepherd. To make a very long story short, there is so little value added by the Green Line in crossing the river and going to 16th Avenue in comparison to the cost and the risk in doing that. We're crossing the Bow River. This is a major river watershed. There are environmental hazards when you start building things to cross the Bow River. There is, and getting back to respect in existing communities, there is some pushback, and indeed all the planning and the functional plan have not been completed for that north section along Center Street. We're seeing pushback from people in terms of respecting some of the existing development in areas. The very contentious one we just heard about in the last few weeks was the Dairy Queen incident along Center Street North. As opposed to if we were to take and run from downtown and go to the full south end, the way it was originally designed, down into Seton, which we just spoke about, there are no issues with regards to land procurement and eliminating businesses and homes. The land is there. It's open. You can go and stand right now in this wonderful community of Seton on an empty field, smack dab in the middle, a couple 100 yards walk between one of the province's newest and largest healthcare facilities, is the South Health Campus Hospital, the world's largest YMCA, in Seton. And we have a train, an LRT stop planned right there to service these major pieces of infrastructure. these facilities that are a benefit to Calgary, and they're ready to go. The shovels could literally be in the ground on that right now. If we were to not go across the river, extend to the south, we'd be doing it for less money, less risk. We'd be taking more cars off the road because you'd be eliminating traffic on Deerfoot, which is a whole nother study in terms of how we can, increase the viability of Deerfoot Trail and improve that. And the improvements coming to Deerfoot Trail are years and maybe even decades down the road, but we can provide that service to these new neighborhoods that were designed properly and designed with the mass transit in mind. If we just don't throw out all the work that has been done on the Green Line, just change that construction schedule, just shift it from 16th Avenue to downtown to the end of Seton, the benefits would be just way greater than what is being proposed right now.
And Jason and I actually recently had a conversation on here about the Green Line, and a large chunk of that conversation was about the idea of flood mitigation, because it's such a risk when you're crossing the bow, and we're talking about potentially underground stations and things like that. And it just seems like what you're discussing would be a much more common sense approach to this.
Agreed.
Yeah, I call it a sensible approach. I have resisted greatly using the term common sense for some obvious reasons. So I just refer to it as sensible.
Yeah,
absolutely. And I think, what both of you would agree on is one of the things that this project specific to the Green Line really, really needs, I think, for the betterment, or for this to move forward, is for it to not be such a, ethereal, amorphous project without, very much concrete, or at least some sort of rendering to see what these would look like. Jacob and I spoke about how this project kind of aligns to the event center, where at least in the event center, we have renderings, we have physical, tangible points and contributions and ideas as to what this will look like. And right now we just don't have that with the Green Line. So I'm sure, I'm hoping that both of you, are our council member, or part of our council coming up here, and both of you can give all of us some visualization on that sensible thinking plan. Absolutely.
Yeah, and I know there are a large number of people that are proponents for crossing the river and going north along Center Street. And I've heard two. I want to address them because I understand their point of view, but I want to address the two most common reasons given for going across the river and up Center Street. And one is that we have that there's a lot of ridership along the bus lines up and down Center Street. So, and they say, well, that'll help pay back the Green Line because of the ridership numbers. But I would question that. Not the level of ridership, but that line is well served with bus transit right now, because it's a straight shot up and down Center Street. There's a reason why ridership is high along those bus lines. It's because they work. So if we can service that with existing bus transit, why would we increase the cost of providing the same service to people by building an LRT along that line? So from a cost standpoint, we're going to be transporting the same number of people roughly with a higher cost model. So I'm not sure that argument that there's a lot of ridership along Center Street really plays into the reason for crossing and going up to 16th Avenue. And the other one and I've heard some mayoral candidates talk about it, is that there really is a desire to have the Calgary airport tied in to our transit system in a better way, and the LRT. And a matter of fact, it's on the infographic right there. The future connection to the Calgary International Airport. But let's talk about that realistically for just a minute. To get from 16th Avenue, even if we complete that, as far north up to about 64th, where they plan on coming across, and then build across Deerfoot, get to the airport. That, and I'm going to throw out a rough number. By the time we get to there, that's going to cost what, $6 to $10 billion?
That stretch is
somewhere in that range, easily, maybe more. But what a lot of people don't realize is that we already have virtually meters away from airport property. Well, hundreds of meters, but it's still meters. If you look at the map in Northeast, Westwind Station is very, very close to the southeast corner of airport property, an existing station around our existing LRT line. A number of years ago, council made a decision. We built a $300 million tunnel underneath the airport, underneath the runways, to connect that part of the city to the airport. It's currently not being used by City of Calgary Transit. The bus lines don't go through the tunnel. We could tie the airport terminal into the LRT with an express shuttle service between the airport terminal and Westwind's LRT. It takes about 10 minutes, 10 to 12 minutes to run. The train stops every 16 minutes. We wouldn't even have to change the schedule for the current LRT in the Northeast to tie the airport in with an express shuttle service direct, walk off the curb at the airport terminal, step out of the bus, take 20 steps, walk onto the train on an express shuttle. And rather than spending billions of dollars to tie public transit into our LRT system, that plan could be executed comparatively for next to nothing.
Sounds brilliant to me as a hopefully post-COVID traveler and somebody who wants the city to be more fiscally responsible. There was one last fiscal responsibility thing I wanted to touch on with you, and that's the idea of us having the most well-compensated council and administration in Canada in a lot of ways. What are your thoughts on that?
I haven't done the comparison to see if it's the most well-compensated council administration. So
I can get you an infographic on that as well.
Perfect. That'd be great. Because I wouldn't want to speak out of turn. What I can speak to is that I know that council has frozen their compensation at 2018 levels. So that's been frozen for a couple, 3 years now. And that's certainly a good decision in our current environment. We haven't seen quite that freezing on the administrative side from City Hall. There's been some, matter of fact, quite a bit of reporting in local media on net pay increasing in terms of city administration. In the budget presentations that happened last fall, they went on for quite some time, and there were a number of presentations from administration to council as far as the budget goes. That there were some charts that were shown there, and some comparison charts between us and other cities in Canada. And they were designed in part to defend some of our current staffing and spending levels. And one of the charts showed that our administrative staff, or the city of Calgary staff and employees per capita, we're slightly below some of the comparison cities that they chose in Canada, and so we weren't too far out of line there in terms of the number of employees, and if that's accurate, that's a good sign. What it showed though is in on the same page was another chart, and it showed spending on city employees as being not lower than, but pretty much in line with, pretty much the same as those same comparison cities. And once again, it was in an effort to defend the level of spending on city employees. But if you took just a second and compared those two charts, if we have fewer employees per capita, but are spending the same as some of the other cities, same comparison, same numbers available, that then implies that we're probably spending more per employee than those same comparison cities.
Yeah, I would agree with that conclusion, and it also touches on something Jason and I talked about earlier when we talked about this issue, and that's a lot of the comparison cities were like Montreal and Vancouver and cities where the cost of living is not only higher, but the economic situation might not be exactly the same based on how things are going in the commodity industry right now. And not that that's the end all and be all, but our situation is different right now.
So. Yeah, it is. And I think you also brought up an excellent point there, Jacob, in that we have to be careful whether it's budgeting or anything else that we're looking at, and you compare yourself to other cities, whether they be in Canada, United States, or overseas. I know a lot of those comparisons like to be done, but we're unique in Calgary. There is no other city that is the same as Calgary, Alberta. When you look at things like changing the way we move in transit, the pre-COVID, would get out to Victoria on occasion, as my wife's family is from there. And, and we talk about bike lanes here, we have more bike lanes serving downtown Calgary than they do serving downtown Victoria. Now, downtown Victoria is arguably a way more functional climate. You can bike 12 months of the year, 365 days virtually.
Yeah, good luck biking in a Calgary winter, man. Yeah.
Christmas time, or just pre-Christmas, and we got that 1.5 foot of snow, wasn't exactly conducive to transporting large percentages of the population by a bicycle in Calgary. Bike lanes have their place. I don't want to be seen as being too overly negative on bike lanes, but we have to do some accurate comparisons. And do we need to continue to expand our bike lane network when we have already a larger network than some other cities where it would be much more conducive or usable, I guess would be the way I'd put it.
Absolutely. And this will, again, I love the idea of being cautious when you're comparing yourself to other cities, because the climate, the economic conditions, the demographic of people, all these things should be informing your opinion. So you're comparing apples to oranges a lot of the time. Jason, do you want to add anything real quick? And
I agreed. Again, it's the comparison is comparing through cities is always is something we hear a lot of. I think that going on a grander scale, we hear a lot of comparison to places like Norway, and we get as a province or as a country, and we get compared to other parts of Europe and things that they're doing there and that we're not doing here, or vice versa. And unfortunately, it's a matter of, like we talked about, apples and oranges, and you have to be cautious at that comparison. But wow, that is that is staggering to think about how many bike lanes we have in comparison to a city like Victoria. It's fascinating.
So I think we could be talking all day if we wanted to, but it's about time to wrap up another episode of Your Neck of the Woods here. We've been talking to Mike Lavalley, candidate for Ward 12. You can learn more about him at mikelavalley.ca. And I don't know about you, Jason, but I would love to have you on again in the future if you have the time.
Absolutely, I would agree with that. Please, Mike, say yes.
Yes.
Just kidding.
Thank you very much, gentlemen. I want to tell you how much I sincerely appreciate the invite and the opportunity to speak with you today. And let's do it again. You just tell me when, and I'll be there.
Absolutely. And as usual, if you out there have any questions you'd potentially like us to ask candidates or issues you want to cover, feel free to reach out to me at Jacob for Ward 1 on social media or on my website, jacobforward1.ca. And that's what's happening in your neck of the woods for another week. Thank you.